Anyways, back to the development of aggression in children, the development of criminality in adults. Here's how it seems to work, at least in part. It's more complicated than this, but I'll put in some of the sociological elements as well. So if you take children and you group them together in in groups defined by age, so let's say you have 32-year-olds, 33-year-olds, 34-year-olds, all the way up to 18. And then you watch them interact, and you code their behavior for kicking, biting, fighting, and property theft, then what you'll find is that the 2-year-olds are by far the most aggressive of the lot. So that's pretty interesting, you know, because you think, well, children are naturally peaceful, and if they're aggressive, it's because they learn it. It's like, no, that's true for a small minority of children. But there's a substantial number of children who are aggressive at 2 by nature. Most of them are male. Now that doesn't mean most children are like that, because they're not. Even if you look at 2-year-olds who are the most aggressive human beings, most 2-year-olds aren't aggressive, but some of them are. And most of those are male. Okay, so then let's say you identify this cohort of aggressive 2-year-olds and you track them across time. Track them until they're 4 years old. What you find is the vast majority of the hyper-aggressive male 2-year-olds get socialized perfectly well. So by the time they're 4, they're temperamentally probably still more aggressive, but they've become civilized little monsters, so other people can tolerate them. And that means that they've had parents or peers or educational experiences that enabled them to learn how to interact productively with other kids and to bring their aggressive nature under control. Some of that seems to be mediated by the opportunity to engage in rough and tumble play. And that's one of the things that we know that helps socialize rats, for example. It's vital to them, but it also seems to really be good for socializing young kids. And rough and tumble play, which is something that adult males particularly like to do with young kids, by the way, not before 9 months because they're just too little, but once they become ambulatory and, you know, kind of puppy-like so that they're a little bit more robust, then you can play a lot with them, and you can play with them right at the edge of danger too, which kids they absolutely go nuts for that. They love that. So when I had little kids, I made this kind of wrestling ring out of these 2 couches that we had that would hook together. And I'd bring them on there and, you know, toss them up in the air and catch them, you know, 8, 10 feet. No, a foot in the air and catch them. And they'd go like this, and then, you know, I'd catch them and they'd laugh, and I'd throw them up and they're all freaked out, and then they'd laugh. And, you know, so they're learning trust with that in an embodied way. And they're also learning, and this is from stretching them out and wrestling them and twisting them around and letting them pull on your hair and hit you and all of those things. They learn deep in their bones exactly what can hurt them and what doesn't. And you want to kind of push them to the edge, you know, so that they can tell the difference between what hurts and what's still within the realm of the game. And you do the same thing when they're wrestling with you. So they learn not to, you know, awkwardly stick their thumb in your eye or do things that are actually painful, like grab your lip and pull it. You know, it's like, no, you let go of my lip, you know. And so that seems to help regulate the aggressive impulses and help the child find a more appropriate embodiment. You could think that what you're doing in some sense when you're rough and tumble playing with kids is teaching them how to dance, because that is what you're doing. You know, you're making them comfortable in their bodies in all of its extension, and building in that kind of body fluency that you see in people who are well situated inside themselves. And so that's something to really think about. Back to children. See, I kind of knew this when I had my kids. I'd already undergone that to some degree and understood what it meant to be a bad person, a terrible person. And one of the things I knew was that manifested itself in families all the time. Tyrannical father, overprotective mother, more rarely overprotective father, tyrannical mother. It's usually the other way around. And the terrible pathological familial drama that Freud made much of in the early 20th century. I'd seen that in many, many situations. Dismal, brutal, awful. And I've seen parents punish their children. And you can also take a page from Nietzsche if you really want to punish your children, or anyone else if you have someone you're interested in punishing, including yourself. You don't ever punish someone you really want to punish for doing something wrong, because that's actually a bit of a relief to them. You know, that's the theme of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. The murderer gets away with it, and it's a relief to him when he gets caught. It's like, no, if you really want to punish someone, you wait till they do something good, and then you punish them. because that'll teach them. You maximize the hurt that way. You decrease the probability that they'll ever do anything good again. And I'll tell you, man, if you want to have a good relationship with someone, that's one thing you don't do. You open your bloody eyes, and if they do something that you would like them to do again, then you tell them how much you appreciated the fact that that happened, and you hope that it replicates, you know. You see, if there's one thing you can take away from tonight's lecture, that's an extraordinarily useful thing to know. Watch, and when people do something that they should do more of, say, look, I saw that you did this specific thing. I saw that it took some effort. Here's what it meant. Here's how I observed it. It's like, keep that up. And man, if you love someone, you do that to them. That's encouragement. That's such a great thing. So, anyways, back to children. So I already knew that I was a pretty decent monster by the time I had kids. And I thought, well, my kid's little, you know, like a baby or 2-year-olds. Like, I'm a horrible monster. And so there's an uneven power problem here. I better not let that child do anything that really makes me angry. You know, now and then you hear about something horrible that happens. When I was in Boston years ago, I read about a woman who plunged her 2-year-old daughter's arms into boiling water. You think, well, how in the world can that happen? It's like, well, you know, she's probably hungover. She probably just lost her job. She was probably desperate in 6 different ways. She probably didn't have any decent disciplinary strategies for children. She probably didn't have anyone helping her. She was bitter and resentful and angry, and the child misbehaved at exactly the wrong moment. And like, you're going to be around your children a lot, and so you might want to have it so that they don't misbehave at exactly the wrong moment. Because all hell can break loose if they can, and I didn't want that to happen. And I knew that it was easy for people to hate their children, even though they mouth the words that they love them all the time. I saw very little evidence of that in many situations. And so one of the things, you know, you have a natural affinity for children, and even more, maybe a more powerful natural affinity for your own children. So that's a good start. But you don't want to set them up as an enemy against you. You don't want to allow them to engage in the kind of hierarchical challenge that makes you irritable and resentful. That's not a good idea. And if the things they do make you dislike them, the probability that they will make other people dislike them is extraordinarily high. And so you can consult your own irritability. And you can say, look, kid, I used to tell my kids this, you know, when they were 3 or 4. I'd say, look, I'm not in a very good mood. And I'm likely to be unreasonable, so it'd be best if you'd go in your room and play for a while. It's like, I like you, man. You're a great kid, but like, get the hell out of here for a while. You know, and they were fine with that. We'd trained them already at that point to be able to go play by themselves in their room, you know, which is something a kid should be able to do anyways. But you need to know what sort of monster you are if you're going to be a good parent. And if you think, oh, I'm not a monster, it's like, oh, yes, you are. You're just an unbelievably unconscious monster, and that's actually the worst kind. So, and then the other thing about that chapter is there's an idea in it, and it's an idea that I think is well supported by the relevant literature, which is that your fundamental job as a parent, especially of a child from 0 to 4, is to make that child eminently desirable socially. So you're a successful parent if, when your child is 4, all sorts of other children want to play with him or her. That's really that's like if you want one marker of whether or not you've been successful. That's it. Now, some children are a lot harder to get along with than others, and some children have a harder time playing. And so I'm not saying that every parent who has a child that isn't popular at 4 is at fault for that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the reverse, which is you can be sure that you've been successful if your child is not popular exactly, but desirable as a playmate. And so then you think, well, what have you done for your child? Well, you've opened up the entire world of children to them. So because they know how to play, which is a very deep knowledge, and it starts to become inculcated probably at the breast, and certainly in the course of rough and tumble play at about 2 years of age. It's a deep embodied knowledge. They know how to play, like a good well-trained dog knows how to play. You know, you meet a new dog and you go like this, and the dog goes like this. You think, oh, that dog, I can go like this and it won't bite me, right? It knows how to play. And a kid who's awake and alert is just like that, like a well-socialized kid. If you know anything about kids, is you can take a 4-year-old and make a little play gesture at them and they'll smile right away and start playing just right now. And that's what you want for your kids. And then everywhere they go, other kids like them and will include them in their play, and play is the way that children develop. And so if other children include them in their play, then the children develop. And the poor kids that don't get befriended at the age of 4, the literature on this is crystal clear. If your child is an outcast at the age of 4, the probability that anything can be done about that is almost zero, no matter what you do. And I hate to be so blunt about that, but I know the literature, and that's what the literature suggests. And then the other thing is, if you don't allow your children to engage in dislikable behavior, then adults will like them, because adults actually like kids. You know, one of the things I loved about having little kids in Montreal, I lived in a poor area in Montreal. There's a lot of rough guys around there, and we used to roll our daughter around in a stroller, and these rough guys, you know, like, God only knows what they were up to. They were rough-looking guys. You know, we'd roll our daughter by them, and they'd like smile, and they'd crouch down and make little goo faces, and you know, they were. I tell you, one of the great things about having little kids is they bring out the best in other people. You see a whole side of humanity, even among the darker parts of humanity. You see a whole side of them that you wouldn't normally see, and it's lovely. And the thing is, if you're good to your kid in the real way, you can help them maintain that tremendous attractiveness that they have as young children, and to respond to adults properly, like a puppy that wags its tail instead of growls and, you know, goes for your ankle. And then wherever they go, adults welcome them and teach them things and pat them on the head and smile at them genuinely, instead of saying, oh my God, here comes that couple with that goddamn brat again. You know, which is that's a horrible thing to do to a child, because then everywhere they go, all the goodwill is false. You know, there's nothing that you can do to someone that's more terrible than to put them in a world where all the goodwill directed towards them is false. That's a terrible thing. So anyways, that's chapter 5. And so here's the idea. You know how you tell your kid to be a good sport? You say, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game. Okay, so I've been unpacking that in my lectures, because it's really, really complicated. It's like, you tell your kid that, and they look at you and they think, well, what do you mean by that? Aren't I supposed to try to win? It's a soccer game, I'm supposed to win. And you say, well, yeah, you're supposed to win, but it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game. You know that that's right, but you don't know how to explain it to your kid. You say, well, you want to be a good sport. Okay, so imagine this. This is how it works, and this is crucially important. So, first of all, life is not a game. Even a game is not a game, because a game is, most of the time, a game is the beginning of a series of games. So let's say that you're on a soccer team. Well, there's winning the game, but the game isn't the issue. The game is the whole series of games. So maybe the game is winning the championship. And winning the championship and winning a game are not the same thing. And the reason for that is, well, maybe if you want to win a game, the best thing to do is to let your star player make all the moves. But if you want to win a championship, maybe the best thing is for your star player to do everything he or she possibly can to develop all the other team members. That's a different strategy. And the reason it's different is because it iterates across time. Okay, so I'll tell you a quick story. So when my kid was playing hockey, when he was about 12 or so, he was in a championship game, just at a local arena, you know. And it was really fun to watch. The teams were pretty equal, which is something that you want, so that everybody can expand their skills while they're playing. And it was like 5 seconds to the end of the game, and the other team made a breakaway and came down, and the guy came down the ice and scored. It was a beautiful goal, and it was 4-3, and that was the end of it, right? And on my kid's team, there was the kid who was the star, and he was a pretty good hockey player. He came off the ice, and he was very annoyed about what had happened. And he smashed his stick on the cement and was complaining about the refereeing and acting as if he'd been robbed. And his father came up, and instead of saying, get your act together, kid, that's no way to display yourself after a loss, he said, oh yeah, man, you were robbed, that the referees didn't ref right, and you played the best, and you should have won. And I thought, you absolute son of a bitch. You're ruining your son. And then the question is why? Because his son was the star and was trying to win. Why was he ruining his son? Well, you're trying to train your son not to win the game. You're trying to train your son to win the championship. And so that's a series of games. But then life isn't the championship. Life is a whole bunch of championships. It's a whole sequence of them. And so what you're actually trying to train your son to do is to be a contender in the entire series. And the way you do that is by helping him develop his character. And the character is actually the strategy that would enable him to win the largest number of games across the largest possible span of time. And one way you do that if you're a kid is like, well, what do you want to do with your kid? You don't want to teach him to win. You want to teach him to play well with others. And that's to be reciprocal. So that means to try to win, but also to pay attention to to developing the other people around him, and not to put winning the game above everything at all times. So then he's fun to play with. And this is absolutely crucial. You can help your kid become fun to play with between the ages of 2 and the age of 4. If your kid is fun to play with, then what happens? Kids line up to play with him. And adults line up to teach him. And if kids line up to play with him, then he'll have friends his whole life, and he'll be socialized, and he'll be invited to many games, some of which he'll win, all of which he'll be able to participate in. And if he's fun to play with, then adults will teach him things, and then he wins at life. And so when you say to your kid, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game, what you're saying is, don't forget, kid, that what you're trying to do here is to do well at life. And you need to practice the strategies that enable you to do well at life while you're in any specific game. And you never want to compromise your ability to do well at life for the sake of winning a single game. And there's a deep ethic in that, and it's the ethic of reciprocity in games. Part of the reason that we're so obsessed with sports is because we like to see that dramatized, you know, like the person we really admire as an athlete isn't only the person who wins. We don't like the narcissistic winners. They're winners, and that's a plus. But if they're narcissistic, they're not good team players, they're only out for themselves, then we think, well, you're a winner in the narrow sense, but your character is suspect. You're no role model, even though you're a winner. And it's because we're looking for something deeper. We're looking for that, the manifestation of character that allows you to win across the set of possible games. And that's a real thing. That's a real ethic. It's a fundamental ethic. But if you don't get them successfully domesticated, tamed, roughly speaking, by the time they're 4, their peers reject them. And that's a big problem, because your job as a parent is to make your child socially desirable by the age of 4. Like you want to burn that into your brain, because people don't know that. That's your job. And here's why. It's easy if you think about it carefully. So you imagine you've got a 3-year-old child, so sort of halfway through that initial period of socialization, and you take that child out in public. Okay, what do you want for the child? Who cares about you? What do you want from for the child? You want the child to be able to interact with other children and adults so that the children are welcoming and smile and want to play with him or her, and so the adults are happy to see the child and treat him or her properly. And if your child's a horrible little monster because you're afraid of disciplining them, or you don't know how to do that properly, then what they're going to do is they're going to experience nothing but rejection from other children and false smiles from other parents and adults. And so then you're throwing the child out there into a world where every single face that they see is either hostile or lying. And that's not something that's going to be particularly conducive to the mental health or the well-being of your child. If your child can learn a couple simple rules of behavior, like don't interrupt adults when they're talking too much, and pay attention, and try not to hit the other kids over the head with the truck any more than is absolutely necessary, then, and share and play properly, then when they meet other kids, the kids are going to try out a few little play routines on them, and that's going to go well, and then they're going to go off and socialize each other for the rest of their lives. Because that's what happens, is that from 4 years old onwards, the primary socialization with children takes place among other children. And so if the kids don't get in on that early, they don't move into that developmental spiral upwards, and they're left behind.